Thank you very much. My name's Mark Estuaries. I'm from Magdalen Catholic High School in Narellan. If you want a copy of this presentation, it's going to have clickable links in there. If you visit that short URL down the bottom there, that will take you straight to this. If you're on Twitter, follow me. I use Flip Learning a lot as well, so I'm actually presenting on Flip Learning after lunch. So the YouTube channel for the videos, particularly for business studies at the moment, I'm still going with geography, but is on there. And I've also just started this year a HAS-related podcast as well. So for anyone interested in humanities, social sciences, geography, history, legal studies, society and culture, it's called Oh the Humanities and the Social Sciences. Have a listen if anyone's interested in being a guest and being on the show. Let me know. I'm more than happy to set up the recording. So I'm looking at case studies for stage 6 in geography. So this is going to be much more of a bit of a lecture style thing where I'm going to show you the processes involved in estuaries with malaria and city urban dynamics. And some teaching strategies and some websites you can use to be able to sort of integrate them in your classroom. So the very first one, so a lot of the stuff here is hyperlinked, so if you do manage to get a copy of this, I really hope I sent you over the view only, not the edit one, because then that would be free for all. But a lot of this stuff is hyperlinked, so you can go through and find copies of articles, find websites there as well, if that helps out with it. So where does this one here on malaria actually fit in to the syllabus? So this one here is looking at the Year 11 one. So looking at biophysical interactions. Okay, so identifying and explaining the biophysical processes. So what I'm really looking at here is the processes itself, and then the actual the management of it. Okay, so we've got so firstly with malaria. So this is one that's not really done, I feel, because it's not really in terms of the hazard, it's not one that's really, I wouldn't say heard of that much, but because it's more of a vector-borne disease in terms of it's got to spread from person to person. It's not something as quite instant as something as flooding or drought or any other sort of natural hazard, really. Or it's still classed as one. So it's that invasion of the bloodstream by a protozoan parasite. Now, it does have to happen it has to start really by only the female mosquito can actually transmit this. Okay, that parasite gets ingested by the female Anopheles mosquito. It undergoes a sexual reproduction within the mosquito, and then when it bites someone else, that's how the process keeps going. So really, the key here is that mosquito. So when we look at how do they actually eradicate or attempt to eradicate it, it's not so much trying to look for a cure for it, but how can we actually stop it from happening in the first place? Because what we'll find a bit later on is there is actually no cure for this. It's more how can we stop it, okay? So it's got to actually reproduce within the mosquito before it can be passed on, and generally this parasite only has a lifespan of about 10 to 14 days. So if this parasite has been in the mosquito for longer enough and it hasn't actually bitten a second victim or a second person, there's no threat. However, we'll find when we look at some maps in a second that the areas that have the highest level of malaria also have the highest population density, so that the chances of this actually spreading are increased there as well. So this is the transmission cycle, quite simplified. So basically, you've got the disease there. Okay, the first infected mosquito has to ingest it, goes to the first infected person. It does affect their liver, and eventually it needs that second mosquito to bite the person and then send it to someone else. So it's something that it's kind of like a pyramid scheme. It's kind of like a pyramid scheme of a natural hazard. So eventually they're going to run out of people to infect. But as I said, the areas they're in are such high population density that chances are they probably won't run out. Okay, and that's the real issue there as well. So the spread of malaria as of 2016, that's not a very clear image. However, the dark red ones, usually you'll find that they are the tropical areas as well, because that's really the areas where the conditions are perfect. Okay, it's warm enough, it's wet enough, and there's enough population in that area to continue this cycle. Okay, so in terms of what humans do, because we look at the interactions here, not just what's happening with the mosquito, but what are humans doing to essentially making this worse. Okay, they're making it worse a lot quicker than they're actually trying to make this better. So what's happening is urbanisation tends to be that biggest issue. Okay, with a lot of, and I know this term isn't used very much anymore, but the developing nations, we're looking more at the third world countries as they were referred to once. The developing nations, now that they're starting to become much more highly urbanised, they now have a lot more resources that are also going to waste. So things like rain barrels, things like discarded canisters, discarded tyres that don't actually get recycled quite readily as other materials. Even if you've noticed in your backyard, you've got a bucket underneath your garden tap, you find that after a while of that being stagnant, you start to get little mosquitoes breeding in there as well. Luckily enough, there's no incidence of malaria here. However, if that were to happen in an area where there is mosquito quite rife through the area, that is a significant concern. And it also takes advantage of those really poorly housed areas. So a lot of shanty towns, slum areas, in those tropical areas, they're also more susceptible because there's also less services in terms of sanitation being offered as well to be able to get rid of that stagnant water. Okay? And climate change really isn't helping either. The areas that are now getting warmer are now making the environment a lot more conducive to these mosquitoes being able to breed. Okay, they were once too cold, you wouldn't get any mosquitoes there, but now they're getting too warm. Even a slight increase in temperature, so they're looking at about 1 to 2 degrees is what they want. Well, not what they want, but what they want to try and aim for as a best case scenario for climate change. You're still looking at least up to about 45% to 60% of an increase in incidence of malaria in the world because of just that 1 to 2 degrees of heat. So climate change isn't really helping here either. Now, in terms of, I know I'm sort of rushing through this, but I've got 3 case studies that I really want to show you, and more importantly, looking also at what websites and strategies you can use to integrate these case studies. So there are some treatments for malaria, okay, namely quinine, which you can find in things like tonic water even. There's no cure. All it does is try and mask the symptoms and make it a bit better, but there's no cure for everything. One at least that covers every single cycle, rather than just blocking it in the final stage or blocking it at the start. There's no cure here. One of the most viable options is using treated bed nets with insecticide, generally using DDT, which has been banned for quite a while. However, it's still in use in some parts of the world. In order to give there's about 300 million bed sites in sub-Saharan Africa alone that could use bed nets to prevent malaria. In order to protect a family of 5 for at least 5 years, you're looking at about $1 to $1.5 billion for a 5-year program to cover these bed sites. And that's roughly equivalent to 1 day operating budget for the US's Pentagon. So there are options available to try and stop this, but it then comes down to one of the strategies we'll look at, and coming from it's not something that's only happens in a Catholic school. Something that happens in every school is looking at, well, what's the social justice there? Is it really fair that we're spending that much money on surveilling what other people are doing around the world rather than actually keeping them alive? There we go. It's about $5 on average. Okay, so about 3 nets are required for 5 people in a house, and that comes down to at least $1.5 billion. for a 5-year program. So hopefully the internet won't let me down, I can show you some of these. So a lot of things you can do here are using things like Coropath maps to look at the infected areas, how they change over time, but then more importantly, we can't ignore the fact of climate change. That is real, that's something that is happening. So you can't really say, well, best case scenario, what if there was no climate change? Unfortunately, there is. And you can't exclude that from what's happening here. Some of the literacy links as well in terms of being able to bring in, and we use an ideal paragraph structure. I know there's peel with an A instead of an E, there's petal, there's steel, there's a lot of different paragraph. We changed to the ideal structure this year because we found that at our school we had 13 different paragraph structures across the school. So then we have kids coming from year 7 through year 8, or even with a different teacher, they say, how do you want me to write this? And you say, I'll use the steel structure. Well, I don't know how to use petal. Or I don't know how to use teal with 3 E's, or teal with 2 E's, or teal with 2 E's and an A instead. So it doesn't really matter how you structure this, okay? But looking at, so why should funding go towards actually stopping the spread of malaria as opposed to other diseases? Is there a merit? Because with malaria, there's no cure, and it's with you for life. It's one thing that once you've caught it, you might not have the symptoms ever again, but it's living in you. So what you find is a lot of the areas in sub-Saharan Africa in particular is, particularly with the low nutrition rate and the low health rate there as well, is that a lot of people end up dying from this as opposed to just suffering the symptoms of chills, fever. But once it's there, and a lot of them build up an immunity. If you're infected young enough, you could build up an immunity to it and never really be infected again. However, is there a merit to people stopping, not having to take days off from work or being able to actually work in the first place because they're not having sudden onset of symptoms brought on by malaria? And I know Bill Gates does a lot of work with this as well, with the Global Fund for Tuberculosis and Malaria as well, to make sure that we can actually, again, we can't stop this from happening in terms of the health-wise, but we can stop the mosquitoes definitely from breeding. And DDT seems to be the way to go in a lot of the areas. However, it is banned in quite a lot of other areas for obvious reasons. Using, as I mentioned before, that social justice element of is the cost is $1.5 billion for 5 years? Is that justified? Are people's lives not worth that much? And that really gets the students thinking in terms of, okay, well, I'm pretty comfortable here. I don't have to worry about malaria. But there's something bigger than you somewhere else, or there's someone else as well, looking at the other, to think, okay, well, I might be fine, but what about everyone else in the world? So, and you can structure that any way you want in terms of a debate, depending on the ability of the students in the class as well. Okay, you can structure it in terms of a +3, -3, where you help them try and find where they sit in the spectrum. Or you can have it as an open debate instead, where they formulate their own ideas. There's no guidance of strongly to slightly to in the middle. But they're then able to find their own ideas there. And a great ability to use PBL here as well. Can they come up with any actual strategies other than bed nets? How else can we stop this from happening? Can they solve a problem? Okay, it's a problem that probably may never be solved, but you'd be surprised how students are able to actually blow your mind with ideas. And one of the other activities I showed in one of the other case studies is using Tony Ryan's thinkers keys. I'm not sure if anyone's ever used that before. I'll provide a link to the PDF that's got all the different questioning techniques in there. There's also one for the environment ready-made, mainly for juniors, however, but it structures through just if you give students the ability to show off a bit, why wouldn't you let them? Okay, they may not be the most feasible ideas, but they're thinking. They're doing something to try and make the world a better place. Okay? Actually, I was on Twitter a couple of days ago and someone shared, at the end of exams, they put a piece of paper that just says, on this blank piece of paper, write down everything you know about the topic, but we never asked you in the exam. And it gives them the opportunity to write down, okay, well, I did study, but I just know how to answer that directive term properly, but this is everything I know, but you never ask me. So that's, while you won't mark that, that still gives you the opportunity to say, okay, well, yes, they're still thinking, they know what they're doing. Okay? I'm just also cognizant of the time we've about half an hour to go before lunch. I know that's always everyone's favourite session. And again, if they're really struggling to figure out, okay, well, is the cost of remedial measures justified? I know it sounds a bit selfish, but if they're not willing to get out of their bubble and say, I'm going to think of someone else, well, then you might need to structure it in terms of they're going to have to think about themselves then, to think about this one here, in terms of how would preventing malaria in developing nations then help us? Which then could lead to them realising, okay, well, there are a lot of benefits there, so really, the cost of remedial measures then is justified then. So you might need to do them in the different order there in terms of, depending on how, I want to say sheltered, but how less likely they are to come out of their little bubble. Okay. One of the case studies I'm looking at is urban dynamics in Sydney, and I used to work at a school in the Sutherland Shire. And every time they ask, I'm from southwest Sydney, and every time they ask me, because kids really love your personal life, where are you from? So I'm from Western Sydney, and they're looking and go, is that Warrenora? Gymea? That's still in the Shire? Is anyone from the Shire? So it's only about 5 minutes away from the school, but no, you've actually got to cross a little bridge to get out of there. So again, in that case, you would have used the first one in terms, the third one there in terms of how would stopping it over there help us first, and then you can look at, okay, then what benefit is there? In terms of, okay, so this is still with year 11, biophysical interactions, and looking at estuaries. So this is the syllabus link there, same one, biophysical interactions. Looking again at what are the processes, how sensitive is it? Now this is probably one of the most sensitive ecosystems there is. And we do a lot, and again, you'll sense a theme here with the malaria one and this one here is, we're, as humans, we're not really doing a great job in making sure they don't get damaged. Because ultimately, in the real world, industry, business, money tends to be the ultimate aim. And as a business studies teacher as well, we do try and break that in terms of there's also human beings. Okay, it's great, it's all well and good to have billions and billions of dollars, but if there's no world left to spend it on, what's the point? So what it's looking at here is, how can we really try and stop it from getting damaged in the first place, and what are we doing? And again, looking at some teaching strategies. So this really is where land and sea meet. So this is that brackish water where it's not quite 100% fresh, not quite 100% salty, but it's starting to get diluted a bit before it goes back out to sea. Okay? And you tend to have some sort of barriers there that lock in sediment, and that's the key here. When you stop something flowing back out into the ocean, whether it be the natural sediments from the estuary, or the runoff from industry, or the feces from dairy farms, or the petrol, the oil out of the boats, or the bycatch, or all the different nutrients from overfishing. Once you stop it from leaving, it builds up in that sediment. Okay, and there's a pro and con there. Okay, I know it sounds weird, but the problem is there are nutrients in things like fecal matter from dairy farms. There are nutrients in runoff. But then the downside is too much of that, then you get things like algal blooms, and generally they are then toxic as well. And because this is one of the most fragile ecosystems, what happens then is that there's going to be some really big changes to the food chain there, and that's one thing that we'll look at as well in terms of if, I guess, the bottom end of the food chain starts to get affected, that then ultimately has significant consequences later on. They also provide habitats, nurseries, spawning areas for fish. Okay, prawns and shellfish, and that's also an important one because they tend to feed off whatever's at the bottom of anywhere there are anyway. So when the bottom feeders, crabs, prawns, shellfish, start to pick up all those toxic nutrients, then you've also got the issue of them permeating through the food chain of they get eaten by someone bigger, and etc., as we're aware of things like mercury in fish. Okay? Estuaries help filter that pollutants. They're the buffers. They stop stuff from getting out into the ocean and doing some big damage at their own expense. Okay, so these estuaries, they're trying really hard to stop the widespread pollution of the coastline, but they're killing themselves in the process of doing that. And it really helps prevent flooding, because a lot of these areas have vegetation that are suited to extremely wet environments anyway. So they do a really good job of managing the tidal ebbs and flows. So again, the yellow ones probably aren't going to be that clear. However, there are so many land-based threats, not even looking at what are the water-based threats of things like tourism or boating or fishing, but what are just the land-based threats? So even looking at things like rainwater and surface water, things that drain off the roads, things that drain off roofs, things that drain out of your houses, that eventually could find its way into an estuary. Leakage from, the yellow ones there, leakage from poorly functioning septic tanks, recreational activities, going for a swim, runoff from, as I said before, effluent from from dairy farms as well, paddocks, wastewater treatment plants. They eventually find their way back out into the estuaries, and what happens then is that it starts to leach into the sediments there. So when vegetation, grass, trees, they start to get replaced with those impermeable surfaces, roads, water can't get through anymore, so it's got to go somewhere, and generally goes into these estuaries. You've got heavy metals, toxic organic compounds. You've got factories that produce heavy metals, a lot of toxic materials that don't break down naturally because they never occurred naturally in the first place, are going to be staying there for many, many years. Oops, sorry. And it gets directly there through stormwater drains. So again, I know that Sydney Water's got a presentation up there with a little catchment diorama, what would you call it, a model diorama. I'm lucky enough that my local library close to the school, you can actually borrow a giant model of the catchment area that I'm in and the basin around there. So you can actually look at, we can't pour water into it, but you can look at where does it all go. So I'm situated in Camden, so we're quite close to Warragamba Dam, the Nepean River. We've got a dam on site at our school that we actually use for, and by dam I mean it's a giant hole that catches the stormwater so the factories on the other side don't get flooded during heavy rain. But we use it for year 8 geography field work when we go out into the field and start learning how to use tools first before we actually go and go into a public place. But that goes directly, if it will find its way there. We've got smelters, pulp mills, and I believe, for example, here in Rhodes, or not here, but close by here in Rhodes, and we're, cognizant we're on the side of the Olympics. Before the Olympics, this was all chemical plants. Heavy industry. The Parramatta River was so polluted, they had to do basically a massive cleanup to get it ready for the Olympics. That eventually finds its way into some of the most fragile ecosystems there are. Okay, I don't know, example here at the Olympic Park as well, you've got the wetlands or the mangrove excursion as well, so that's a great link there as well with looking at what do humans do? Okay, there's a theme there with, we're not doing a great job looking after it, and I think we're catching up a bit too late to try and fix it. We've also got the organic matters, again, things like, as I said, those algal blooms come about as well through phosphates, nitrates, just stuff in your dishwashing liquid as well. On a large scale, that stuff there, it's great for getting rid of oil from your plates, but at a big scale, that stuff, that's a fertiliser. That builds those algal blooms if it's on a big enough scale. So imagine that from farms that use fertilisers, maybe phosphates and nitrates. When that runs off, from your kitchen sink's not going to make a big difference, but when it's coming in millions of litres from farms, that's the concern. Mining activities as well, close to where I work and where I live as well. There's a sand mine, a sand quarry, right near the Nepean River. And by right near, I mean about 10 metres away, that's the borderline. So you can imagine as well what kind of damage is being done because of that, that'll eventually then get into estuaries and essentially into hopefully it won't get into Warringamba Dam, but it's close enough around the Baragarain area. Then we've got aquaculture ponds as well, because they're trying to feed the fish to grow them. So they're putting nutrients into the water so the farmed fish can eat. That eventually as well builds up in those estuaries and gets absorbed into the tissues of shellfish and prawns and crabs, which then get eaten by bigger animals. And you've also got the uneaten feed. So what's not eaten, that has to go somewhere. And of course the other fecal waste and the chemicals used in aquaculture as well. So it's not just what's happening on the land, but there's stuff happening on the water as well that's not helping the situation. Now, in terms of estuaries, and again, using online mapping tools really does help, because it allows the students to find their own, well, not their own estuaries, but to locate estuaries around the world and then create a land use map around it. Actually look at, okay, what is around this estuary? Is it council protected? Are there farms everywhere? And then you can start to draw those links and say, okay, well, if there are farms around, it's a dairy farm. What kind of output is coming from that dairy farm? Is it got feces in there? Is it a wheat farm that's going to have fertilizers in there instead? And that also, I haven't included in here, but there's a great topography website, the Earth elevation map online, which I'm going to add into this later on. This will be a live document, so if you log in later, there'll be some more stuff there. You can find out the topography of the area as well. Where is it actually draining into? Where is it actually draining into? This one's one of my favourites, so hopefully it will actually open up for me. So using a flood predictor map as well. Now, as we said, and this can work well with the malaria one as well, so if I pick, for example, Australia, and let's go into Sydney because that's where we are, and I set it back to 0. So this is everything as it is now is normal, so that's where we are at 0. If sea level were to rise by, let's say, 3 metres, this is that's where the rivers will start to sort of move. I know it's not that clear, it's a bit bright there. If it were to go up by 20 metres, what's the prediction going to be? All of a sudden we've got Richmond and Penrith in a bit of strife there, again around the dam area. If we go further up to, and this again links to the whole idea of, okay, well, if estuaries are that transition point between rivers and the ocean, if the rivers then become bigger and the land use obviously then changes around it, what impact is that going to have? If I then bring it up to 60 metres, that's most of Sydney underwater, but then I've actually got coastal property now where I am. And you look, okay, well, most of the city will be underwater there. You can then look at other areas around the world. So if you pinpoint where any estuaries are, you can then look at, okay, well, best case, worst case scenario for sea level rise. What will be the new land use around that area? How will that then affect the ecosystem? Some general ones as well. So what's your local council? And again, I'm not sure where everyone's from, but there seems to be some sort of, not conflict, but non-communication between local councils, state government and federal government. Particularly if you're from, is anyone from a coastal council area? Particularly for managing things like sand dunes, the local council doesn't seem to talk to the state government in terms of talking to the federal government as well about what needs to be done. So what is your specific local council doing to actually mitigate estuarine destruction? Evaluate it. That's a high order skill. It's okay to just identify and just say they're putting up silt traps to stop the sediment from getting into there. Well, that's great. Is it working? Is it actually doing what it's meant to be doing? Looking at the food chain, okay, what's going to happen with those? What's going to happen? Again, another ability here to include PBL. What mitigation strategies can they make? And again, they might not be feasible. They might cost billions and billions of dollars, and the council may say, you know what, that's more than we've got. They can't even fix roads half the time. They're not going to spend billions of dollars on an estuary. There's no economic benefit, almost. But what mitigation strategies can they develop? Again, you'll be surprised what kids come up with. And this is the thinker's key that I was talking about. So if I open this up, it's actually got, and this is structured again for gifted and talented students, so really good to extend students. This is found freely online. I'm not breaching any copyright there. I just Googled it a few years ago to see what I can do to help extend my kids, and this came up. This is linked straight through that that slide there. So what it's got is, it's got what it is, why you use it, what's an example of it, but the best bit is, down the bottom, it's actually got, where's the, more for juniors, but it's already a ready-made one about the environment. Okay, so look at the reverse. So list 10 places that can't be destroyed by humans, as opposed to list 10 places that are at risk. Well, what isn't at risk, and why isn't it at risk then? What's making it different to the places that can get destroyed easily? What if the world's population immediately doubled? Okay, BAR, the bar, so make it bigger, augment it. So, greenhouse, how can you make it better? Okay, how many ways can you clean up oil spills? That'll be a great one in itself for estuaries as well. How many ways can you clean up oil spills? And it always blows the students' minds when you say, you know what, you've got it growing on you right now. And people pay good money to get your hair. Hair is used quite frequently to soak up oil spills in the ocean. Funnily enough, as a business studies teacher, again, I find case studies all the time. BP had an oil spill just off the coast of Australia somewhere just recently, and they said, you know what, that's actually a good thing it happened. And people said, why is it a good thing we had an oil spill? And I said, well, because it's going to provide jobs for the local area, because now people are going to have something to do. They can go out and clean it up, so it's now providing money. Again, totally negating the fact that we're not helping make this a better place, particularly for those fragile estuaries that then soak up everything that's there and hold it there. Again, and they're pretty made ones, and this document here gives you other ones about Australiana, outer space, if there's anyone here that's doing anything about dinosaurs, etc. It's all ready made for you, but it gives you blank ones where you can print out and write on your own as well. But all the explanations are in the front part of that document. So if you Google Tony Ryan thinker's keys, this is a great way to really structure for the kids that need the help, but really push your higher end students as well, particularly for the ones we ask them to have the most ridiculous questions possible. Okay? In the last 15 minutes, again, cognizant of lunchtime, for Year 12, looking at Sydney, this is probably my favourite one, particularly because I'm driving in through the M7, and then you hit the M4 parking lot on the way in as well. And all you see when you're sort of on that, has anyone been on the M7 M4 sort of connection before? Because you're so high up, you get to see everything. And the only thing you see is really grey. And that's just industry. And then what we look at, what I'm looking at here in this case study is there two Sydneys? And this fits in with this syllabus document here in terms of what's the social structure, what are the spatial patterns of advantage, disadvantage. Is there any clear wealth, poverty or ethnicity lines that we can use to designate Sydney? And what is Sydney? And as I said before, working in the Shire for a few years, you get students that really outside of their bubble, they're not really sure. You have to cross the bridge, and there's always that running joke as well, people from Manly don't cross the bridge down into Sydney, or, you know, and that's actually something that is going to be coming up here in terms of it just exacerbates the stereotypes that people have in the first place of Sydney. So look, Sydney, most populous in Australia, I don't need to give you the stats, we're geographers, we know the stats. Okay, and for Sydney, I'm including what we call Greater Sydney, so up to Coringai, so I'm not including just Sydney CBD, which again, blows students' minds when they realise Sydney's not just a physical place. Okay, Sydney's a much bigger area, and when you compare it to, we've got about 27 million people in Australia, there's about that living in all of New York City, and about that living all in Mexico City, or all in Tokyo City. And we've got that spread out all the way across Australia as well. So that really, when you think about it in terms of our size, when you look at these differences, they kind of get blown up a bit more. So this is how this is my own interpretation of how I've sort of carved up Sydney. So you've got the Estuaries sort of brought through northern beaches, eastern Sydney, so Sydney City, Botany Bay, through to that tip of, sort of Kurnell area. What I've classed the inner west and then the greater west across there. I know a lot of councils have changed names since then, but that's the point in time I found that was the name of those councils there. So that's what I'm classing as Sydney. So when I say the east and the west is quite a small chunk across here, and the west is really everything else. Okay, really is everything else across there. So this is the perceived differences. These are generalisations. These are not my words either. I don't want to get in trouble for saying stuff that you might not agree with in terms of how people see different parts of Sydney, because I found this in another paper. But the general idea is that it's an us and them attitude. It's an us and them attitude that the Western Sydney is homogenous, it's all grey, it's ugly, it's all flat, it's hot. You're driving over the M7, all you just see is grey. Whereas Sydney, the eastern part, it's all green. Everyone's wearing active wear on Bondi Beach, drinking lattes and doing yoga. There's always a sunrise or a sunset. There's no smokestacks coming into the sky. It's all serene, it's all beautiful. The idea, and again, the perceived differences from Western Sydney's, the idea that they're all classless, they're uncultured. Whereas in Sydney, they're all law-abiding citizens. There's never any crime in Eastern Sydney. Might be because it never gets reported, but there is crime. But the idea is, they're all law-abiding citizens over there. They're trendy. They're all healthy, they're all thin, they're all balanced people. But then you look at, okay, well, while there is a clear cultural grouping, you can't deny that people gravitate to certain areas, and that's the product of years and years of migration, where people go to where's most comfortable for them to go. If you're new to Australia and you've got no English speaking abilities, you'll go to people that are the same as you because you've got that support network. So really, you can't use the immigrant mate of Sydney really to just say, okay, well, that's the difference. Because there are areas around Sydney where, for example, I believe I come up here with, using languages other than English. And the perceived idea is that people that can't speak English are in Western Sydney. However, Blue Mountains and Camden actually have the highest incidence in Western Sydney of people that can't speak anything other than English. So you can't really say, okay, well, there's a clear line in Sydney. Everyone on the east speaks English perfectly, and everyone from, the right side of that line, they don't speak a lick of English at all. Because there's two councils, at least in the the furthest parts of the city, that don't speak, the highest proportion of people that don't speak anything other than English in the first place. So really, is there two Sydneys, or are we one giant city? And again, looking at the view of, we're not quite a mega city, we haven't got enough people. But when you look at places like Tokyo City, for example, where they sort of incorporated 4 or 5 other cities around them, and then just called themselves Tokyo, is that something that's going to happen here, particularly with the state government's plan to create a third city, or a second and a third city in Sydney? So making Parramatta the next big city in Sydney, and then making Liverpool the one after that. And then Macarthur down in Campbelltown in Camden area, making that the next one there. Because the idea is they're going to build an airport sometime, at some stage. And with that comes more transport links. They're building an underground railway very close to where I live, and it's towards an outlaw because it's all virgin, green pasture. I live in a great area. I drive 10 minutes to the north, and I start to get into urban areas. I drive 10 minutes to the south, and I'm in the middle of nowhere. And they're going to be they're going to be building that underground train station right through there in order to cater for the airport, the Orbital Road. It's been in the news just the last few days, actually. So really you're looking at, okay, well, is that a good idea? Where's our food going to come from eventually? Particularly in the northwest, which is one of the other highest growth rates in Sydney. Where is our food going to come from? So we can't use ethnicity, we can't use background as a way to say there's more than, there's 2 or 1 cities, because it's too blurry. it's a lot easier to look at, okay, well, let's look at socioeconomic conditions. So we use that. And again, we've got North Shore, so north of the Harbour Bridge and north of the Parramatta River, so north from here, and the eastern suburbs statistically have the highest incomes, and they're generally both home to white, Anglo-Celtic, highly skilled people. Okay, they're ABS stats. I'm not making any generalisations, they're just the ABS stats. Okay? Whereas West, Southwest generally have that highest concentration of NESB, so non-English speaking background immigrants, and the highest rates of unemployment. Now again, I want to make it very clear, there's a little terms and conditions that correlation doesn't equal causation, as we know. Just because there's it's high rates of non-English speaking doesn't mean that that automatically equates to that's why there's unemployment, that's why there's crime. It doesn't work as simple as that. But there's got to be some sort of benefit to this. There's got to be benefit, and particularly when you look at, let's move aside from stage 6 geography and look at just junior geography, when you get into think of, if we didn't have immigration, if we didn't have such a big cosmopolitan city, would we have half the stuff we've got now? And will your life be different because of that? There are a lot of shops that wouldn't exist if we never had immigration in the first place. A lot of services we never have. A lot of opportunities that we wouldn't have because we didn't have immigration. So you can't say that that's a negative for us for Sydney. If anything, there's a positive, there's an advantage there. It also leads to, hopefully, the idea of cultural acceptance. This is what I was leading through before with the idea of someone else. There's got to be someone else. And if anyone was in Ryan Gill's Cultures of Thinking masterclass in the morning, looking at those skills that people need when they leave school, that we're not factory producing students. We're not factory producing students. We're trying to set up people to be citizens of their country, citizens of the world, and you like to think that, okay, they got a band 6, but they're also a decent human being as well. Because in my mind, if they get a band 6 but they're not a decent human being, well, that's not a success for me. You want to get both. So you'd hope that this cultural mix allows for cultural acceptance, growth in interesting languages. There's a lot of schools that offer Italian, but there's a big range of other languages being offered now because we've got this cosmopolitan landscape. It opens students' eyes up. It also allows for the government community projects aimed at helping migrants and non-migrant residents in Sydney. Okay, I'm the child of a migrant. Technically, I'm a first-generation Australian. My parents were both born overseas, and they arrived here in the late 70s. Statistically speaking, I shouldn't be able to speak English that well, and I shouldn't have a university degree. But I like to think I speak English okay. I've got a bachelor's, I've got two postgrads, and I'm currently working on my master's. Statistically speaking, that shouldn't be right. But it's because we've got this cosmopolitan landscape that we've got the opportunity to do that. It's just, do people have access to it? The M7 is a perfect example of this as well. It's really helping to build business in Western Sydney as well, because you've got a lot of the dispatch areas for where it existed Masters, Big W, Aldi along there, that really help build commerce, that then help bring those opportunities. So there's the idea that there's the haves and have-nots. And as I said, there's no, that mentality is exacerbated because people just think, okay, well, if they're all unemployed in Western Sydney and there's high crime, well, there's obviously a difference between us. But it also comes down to what's being portrayed in the media and what's happening in your own classrooms in terms of getting students out of that bubble and really seeing what else is there. I'm cognizant that there's a bit of, I've only got about 2 minutes left, so I do really want to show those websites in terms of teaching strategies. So one of my favourite ones, and again using mapping tools to use to add layers from the ABS data, but one of my favourite ones is this one here, and this is only a recent one. It uses food shops to class Sydney. I'm not sure if people have seen this one before, but we've got what we call the Red Rooster line, which someone found out that for some reason there's no Red Roosters anywhere north of that line anywhere in Sydney. Anywhere in Sydney. Those parts there, they're the final frontier of Red Roosters. Then you can overlay on this map and say, where are the richest postcodes? Well, they're north of that line. Where are the And again, very usually use term poorest postcodes. They're all down there. And then you can overlay different food stores and say, okay, well, we've got Rashay's, which is seen as being quite middle class, it's casual dining. Where do you find any Rashay's in Sydney? Well, they're all below that line. But then you've got, I guess, more status-driven, more up-class, upmarket stores, such as, I know, Harris Farm Markets, where you can only find above that line in Sydney. Gelato Messina, which you can only find the bulk of them. There's a few around the bottom there, but the bulk of them are those little dots above there. You've got, for example, El Jana, I'm not sure if I can pronounce that properly. But again, Middle Eastern cuisine, very ethnic. That have and have not, the whole idea of they're different to us. Where are they? Well, they're all in Western Sydney as well. So again, that's a great tool because it really opens kids' eyes as well, and they say, okay, well, why? And again, this is the business studies person coming out of me as well, of why they need targeting those areas. Is there an inherent reason why they're saying, let's only, use this food store up there? And that's linked again through there as well. And then general debates as well. Really, again, is it really two cities? We've got the donut effect, and that's something that I think over the last few years has sort of been not discounted, but sort of seen as it's not relevant anymore because we've got so much more movement of people that you can't really say it's distinct bands. But just looking at Sydney, just looking at where we're growing, there is a very clear donut effect in Sydney. And then this is a great one. Have kids just come up with their own Sydney. Have kids come up with their own version of Sydney. A city with no... Is it actually possible to have a city that has no division in it? Or do you need those donut bands of this is where everything's located for this area, and then as we go out, this bit's there, we go out a little bit further, and that bit's there for them? Is there a reason why you can't have Rashay's in the north of that line? Will people not go there? Why? We're humans after all, we all eat. Why is there that division of, that idea of, well, if they're from the west, then they need to have that, they need to have that lower, middle class food. Last time I checked, we all eat anyway. So look, I really hope that that's going to be something. Again, I did say a bit more lecture style than normal, but really just getting the context of what are those case studies, how they link to the syllabus, but what you can actually use from them to try and pique kids' interest and put them in. Thank you.